So this story has me walking through the woods, and I am in the woods near my house. And I say woods, but the truth is it is an overgrown Christmas tree farm. And as such, all of the Christmas trees, which are now young adolescent trees, are all the same height. And so it's this dark, deep place where light doesn't really filter through, and the soft Oregon rain doesn't quite make it to the bottom, and the snow doesn't at all. Um, and I'm walking through these woods, and as I walk, I am remembering all the decade of experiences I have in these woods. And I am remembering the first time I fell in love with a boy here. And the little village we made called Ross Rapids, where we hollowed out one of these drifts of blackberry brambles that form in the clearings where the trees die. And I'm remembering the time I made love with my high school girlfriend here. And I'm remembering stories I would tell myself of dwarves and elves and monsters and ghosts in these forests. I'm remembering the times I've met wild turkeys and deer. There are a lot of deer that live here. And I'm walking along, and I am visiting home on this journey, and so I always make a point to visit these woods when I visit home. And I suddenly hear a crackle. It's very soft. It's a very soft crackle, but it stands out in the silence because birds don't really live here. There's not much on the ground except pine needles and moss, and so except for animals moving their way through, there's nothing that lives in these strange, civilized, feral woods. And so I follow the crackle, and I follow the crackle down the slope that leads, I know, to a little clearing with a stream that runs through it. And I'm moving very softly, and I'm bending almost double, because at about this height, there's this tangle of old dead branches that used to catch sunlight, but since have died. So I'm moving almost double to move underneath these, trying not to make a sound, because I don't know what this sound is. And as I'm walking, the second sight of my memories is playing back, and I'm seeing all the creatures that I once thought lived here. I'm imagining elves and dwarves, and I'm thinking, could this be a procession of fairies? It seems like the wrong season. It's not a full moon, but you never know. Maybe it's a centaur. I saw hoof prints once, but it seems unlikely as well. And so I'm creeping down, and these memories are building in my mind, and suddenly my heart stops. Because as I curve around a tree, I see in front of me a skull staring directly back at me, and suddenly I am struck, and I'm certain that I am seeing some sort of sylvan creature, some amalgam of fae and undeath, and I'm petrified with fear for a fraction of a second, and then I realize it's just a skull, a deer skull sitting in the fork of a tree. And it's not the source of the crackling noise. And so I continue down through these little paths made by deer and the occasional humans, following this crackling noise. And it gets ever so slightly louder as I get close, but it's still very quiet, to the point where I'm not sure how I heard it as far away as I was initially. And I eventually come down to the very edge of this clearing, and I peer out through the deep brambles, and I see a man. An ordinary man drinking some cheap beer and building a fire. And in that moment, I had a feeling very similar to heartbreak. Suddenly, all these deep myths I had built for myself, for this place, were shattered, and I was presented with the awkward reality of humankind drinking beers and building unnecessary fires in the outdoors. And then something took over my body, and I moved back up the woods very silently, and I began to gather materials. And I picked up stones, and I picked up branches, and I picked up ferns, and I picked up the skull. And then I slipped back down to where I thought where his path out of the woods would be, and I followed that path up until I found a clearing. And there I built a circle out of the stones. None of them were much larger than this, but I built a small circle out of them. And then inside of that, I made a wreath of ferns and pine branches, and I enclosed the stone circle. And in the center, I found a young sapling that had been broken, and I planted it. And on top of it, I placed the deer skull, facing downhill, facing where I thought he would come back up. And then I left. And I didn't wait to see if he would see it. I didn't wait to see if he would even take that path back out. I just left. And I have puzzled over why I did that strange druidic thing for years. And I don't know if I have an answer. I was seemingly possessed. The only fraction of an idea I have is that I needed, somewhere deep in my being, to communicate that this place was magic to this strange beer-drinking man. I needed him to know that sometimes when you're moving through these woods, you stumble upon large black dogs that you have no reason to expect, and that you'll startle turkeys, and that you'll find deer skulls. And I wanted him to have a sense that I wanted him to unlearn, to lose his perceptions, because that's what that place did for me. Thank you.